Bear Lake Valley followed its usual pattern in the fall of 1892. Before the frost, the fields were cleared. Wagons traveled on roads they knew well. The times that church doors opened and closed were the same as they always were. Nothing big happened. Nothing needed my attention. But in those normal patterns, small breaks started to show up. At first, it was easy to miss them, a visit that ended sooner than planned, a greeting that wasn't warm back, a family that no longer sent its kids to town. These moments didn't stand out on their own. They didn't start to feel strange until they had a lot of them. The Hartwell Ranch was west of Montpelier, Idaho, and it was on a road that got narrower as it got farther away from town. It looked well kept from a distance. The fences stayed up. Every morning, smoke came out of the main house. Animals moved in predictable ways across the fields. There were no obvious signs of neglect. What could be seen didn't make a difference. It was in what was no longer came. Women who used to go to town events stopped going. Kids who had helped with deliveries no longer went near the road. When neighbors asked about them, the answers were short and polite. Sickness, rest, and family issues. The explanations were clear enough that there was no reason to ask more questions. Silas Hartwell took care of these exchanges himself. He didn't yell. He didn't seem upset by the questions. He just ended conversations quickly. People who left his property did not take anything with them. Concrete with them. Only the feeling that more questions would not be welcome. In Bear Lake Valley, that feeling often settled things. A light began to show up near the western edge of the Hartwell property at night. It stayed on even after other houses had gone dark. It didn't move or blink. People who were passing by saw it. People who lived nearby saw it from their porches. No one went near the building it came from. People knew that the Hartwell family was big, but not many could say how many people lived there. There were people who lived there. There were fewer and fewer times when I talked to people in town. There was no talking when deliveries came. Payments were made on time, but sometimes days later, with no explanation. There were no complaints to the police, no lawsuits against the church, and nothing that needed to be looked into by the government. The valley was upset by how few things could be named. The ranch didn't sound like other houses. There were no shouts, no laughter floating across the fields, and no signs of a fight or a party. The quiet stayed the same, without stopping, as if everyone inside knew the rules that guided each movement. A kid stood by the fence at the edge of the Hartwell property one afternoon, watching the road long after it had cleared. He didn't wave back. When people talked to him from a distance, he didn't answer. He turned and walked back toward the house without answering when he was called again. People changed how they acted as the weather got colder, but they didn't talk about it. People talked about the Hartwell Ranch less and less. The routes changed. There were questions that weren't asked. Life went on in Bear Lake Valley around the ranch, and everything that was going on there went on too. If you care about stories like this, please subscribe and leave a comment so they can keep being told. Silas Hartwell moved to Bear Lake County at a time when not many people stayed there for long. At that time, Montpelier was still figuring out who it was. Families came with hope and left when they ran out of land or money. Silas came without warning. He signed up for his, claimed his land, bought basic supplies, and started farming it. There weren't a lot of people with him when he got there. He didn't talk about his plans for the future. He didn't talk about himself more than he had to. What made him different was that he stayed. Silas stayed in the same place season after season, while others moved on. He fixed fences after storms without saying a word. Instead of borrowing tools over and over, he bought new ones. He quietly helped his neighbors when they were having trouble and then went back to his own work, expecting nothing in return. His presence became known not because they were charming or kind, but because they were consistent. People knew what to expect from him. Silas went to church every week and left when the service was over. He did not want to be in charge. He didn't argue about doctrine. When someone talked to him, he listened carefully and didn't say much. His behavior made it seem like he was being thoughtful instead of distant, and that difference was important in Bear Lake Valley. People often trusted men who talked less. He talked about work as a duty and order as a way to keep people safe. Never as preaching, but as watching. He woke up early. He kept track of everything very carefully. He followed routines even when it didn't seem like anyone was watching. People who saw these habits thought they showed self-control. His reputation grew as his ranch did. His land stayed productive even during harsh winters. He took good care of his animals. From the outside, his home looked stable. There was nothing in his life that showed he was disorganized or excessive. Local leaders didn't have much reason to pay attention to him. His paperwork was correct. He paid his taxes. He only did business with the town in a polite way. Silas did not speak out publicly when the federal government started to pay more attention to unconventional families in the area. He didn't say anything. He didn't question authority. He made changes without saying anything. While others were angry about interference, Silas said nothing. He kept working on his land. He kept going to the required meetings. He kept his exposure to a minimum without drawing attention to himself. The valley thought this was more like being careful than avoiding. By 1892, the people of Bear Lake County saw Silas Hartwell as a dependable man who never complained, a household leader whose life seemed to be in control and predictable. That understanding stayed the same as life on the ranch went on as usual, and expectations became clearer. The daily life at Hartwell Ranch had a structure that didn't change much by the end of 1892. Every morning started before the sun came up. People were given tasks quietly, and done right away. Dinner was made at the same times. Children moved from work to lessons based on their usual schedule, not because they were told to. Everyone in the house already knew where they belonged because they had done it so many times. There were 7 women who lived there. Ruth was the center of the family. She made sure that the main house ran smoothly by planning meals, watching over younger children, and making sure that everything went smoothly. Ruth made sure that instructions were clear and easy to understand when they needed to be passed on. Without a doubt. Her job brought her closest to how the family worked every day. Eleanor was in charge of teaching. In a small room set aside for lessons, she taught reading, writing, and the Bible. Education followed set rules. Kids learned to repeat things correctly instead of exploring on their own. Obedience was as important as understanding when it came to measuring progress. Clara took care of the records and supplies. She kept track of the harvests, food stores, and household needs. Her ledgers were always up to date and accurate. She kept track of what came into the ranch and what was eaten without asking for more information than what was given. Maeve worked with plants and medicines. She took care of the garden and made medicines for small illnesses. She was useful because she knew a lot, and she could be independent as long as her work supported the family. Nayan was in charge of storage and preservation. She was in charge of the pantry, the cellars, and the supply rooms. Food was stored carefully and given out according to the plan. Waste was not allowed, and shortages were dealt with. Right away. Odessa took care of clothes and linens. She fixed clothes before they showed signs of wear. The bedding was kept neat and clean. Constant care kept things looking good. Faith worked with the animals. She took care of the animals, fixed the fences, and made sure the ranch stayed productive. A lot of her work kept her outside and away from the main house for long periods of time. There was no overlap between the roles. There was no overlap in responsibilities. There was cooperation, but it was clear who was in charge. Silas Hartwell stayed in the middle of this structure. He gave orders in a low voice and thought they would be followed without question. He watched routines closely and fixed any mistakes as they happened. Just being there often stopped doubt before it could start. There was no privacy in the house. Doors stayed open unless someone told them to close. You could see movement. Conversations were short and to the point. People saw silence as a form of discipline instead of discomfort. Kids were taught that following rules kept them safe. Regulations were said to be a way to keep the ranch safe from the outside world. Questions that went beyond what was being taught were not allowed. Limited and controlled contact with the outside world. People only went to town when they had to. Visitors were rare and short. When contact happened, it followed a set pattern. One of the buildings on the property didn't fit in with the daily routine. There was no visible way for animals, tools, or storage to be used in the long wooden building on the ranch's western edge. There were no chores to do. They told kids not to do it, but they didn't say why. Only Silas was able to get into that building. There was sometimes a light there at night after the rest of the property had gone dark. It stayed the same and was gone by morning. During the day, no one talked about it, and no one was allowed to ask. The routine inside the main house stayed the same. They served meals, taught lessons, and got work done. As winter approached, the household ran smoothly and without any problems. In the first few weeks of spring. In 1893, the daily life at Hartwell Ranch began to change in small but noticeable ways. Ruth was no longer the first to get up. At first, she stayed in her seat while the others made breakfast. She kept giving orders, but her voice sounded less firm than it had before. She moved slowly when she stood up, using the table or the wall to steady herself until the moment passed. There was no announcement. Ruth kept working on the changes. She watched over meals from a chair. She told kids what to do without raising her voice. She put people's worries to rest with short reassurances. She said she was tired. The winter had lasted a long time. The signs got harder to ignore as time went on. A cough settled in her chest and wouldn't go away. She lost her appetite. She started not finishing tasks and letting other people do them for her. The people in the house quietly changed around her. Before anyone else said anything, Maeve saw the pattern. She saw that Ruth's face was losing color and that her hands shook when she picked up a cup. She made things stronger. Herbal teas and meals that she could make to give her body the nutrients it needed. Maeve went to Silas when these steps didn't help. She said that a doctor from Montpelier should come. The request was made slowly and without a sense of urgency. Maeve spoke like someone who was more worried about responsibility than fear. Silas listened without stopping. He didn't respond right away. His voice stayed steady when he spoke. He said that help from outside raised questions, and that doctors wrote down what they saw. That the attention from the town would not help the family. He said that being sick tested faith and strength. Ruth didn't disagree with him. She thanked Maeve for taking care of her and nodded as he spoke. She said that rest would be enough. The conversation ended when she said yes. After that, Silas started to take a more active role in caring for Ruth. He told her when to sleep and when to get up. He told her she couldn't move around the house and told other people to stay away from her. He framed these choices as safety. The family changed. Eleanor made lessons shorter so the kids could help with chores. Odessa did extra work to keep the house in order. Nyan changed the amount of food to fit Ruth's smaller appetite. Faith added more hours to her outside work to make up for the work that was no longer being done inside. Maeve kept making remedies, but Silas kept an eye on how they were used. He asked about amounts and when they would happen. He told her that mistakes had consequences. Ruth had a hard time breathing at night. Silas stayed by her bed and read the Bible out loud in a calm voice. He talked about being patient and giving in. He didn't ask for help. Nobody stepped in. As spring moved past the ranch, life went on in Bear Lake Valley. They planted fields. More and more cars were on the roads. Outside, the world moved on, but the main house settled into a quieter rhythm. Ruth got weaker. Her voice got quieter and quieter. She spent more time lying still and listening than giving orders. The job she used to do started to go away without being given to someone else. Silas was in charge of every change. He had to give his permission for everything that happened. There was no choice left. The family found out that he would only allow care within certain limits. In the middle of the summer of 1893, Ruth died. The morning went by without any hurry. No one went to town. There were no bells. Silas Hartwell had already made up his mind about what would happen next by the time everyone in the house got together in the main room. He quietly told the others that Ruth had died in the night. He said, without stopping and without showing any signs of stress, he told her that her pain was over and that order and discretion needed to be paid attention to. He said that grief was something that should be kept to oneself. They got the body ready inside the house. Silas limited who could get into the room. Maeve could help as long as she was told to, and only for as long as she needed to. The doors were closed. The curtains were pulled. The rest of the family was sent to do other things that couldn't wait. When the coffin got there, it stayed sealed. Silas said that no one should be able to see the body. He said that even in death, modesty must be kept. He went on to say that people were watching families like theirs, and that too much exposure could hurt those who were still alive. Nobody said anything. The burial was at a small cemetery near Montpelier. There weren't many people there. Silas stood apart from the others and quickly accepted their condolences. He didn't say anything about Ruth's illness that wasn't necessary. Those who were there watched him stay calm and thought it was a sign of strength. In Bear Lake County, people dying from illness was so common that it didn't get much attention. People often buried their dead right away. Not all of the time did doctors take part. The valley knew how Ruth's death would happen. The family went back to the ranch after the burial. Without talking about it, they talked about Ruth's place in the daily routine. They split up her work and gave it to other people. Meals were ready on time. Classes started again. Work continued. The structure took her absence in stride without any problems. People inside the house felt better knowing that it worked well. That night, Silas brought the whole family together. He talked about being together and holding back. He told them not to talk about Ruth outside of the house. People who weren't part of the group were told to send their questions to him. He said that mourning would be done quietly and without showing. The rules were followed. Most people didn't notice the small details that were left. Nan remembered that the coffin had been heavier than he thought it would be. Clara knew that some of the burial costs she had written down were not correct. Maeve smelled things in the room where Ruth had died that she didn't recognize. Sharp and hard to tell apart, no one said any of these things out loud. Ruth had been sick. Ruth was dead. Ruth had been put in the ground. That was the story that was given, and it was enough. Life at the Hartwell ranch went on as usual, just like it did before she got sick. The family got used to not having someone there without calling it a loss, and the days moved forward while following the same rules that had been in place before. News came to Bear Lake Valley in bits and pieces. Notices were put up near the courthouse in Montpelier, but they were taken down within hours. They read them quietly and then folded the paper before going back to work. There were no announcements about meetings. There were no speeches. The message got out through routine, not conversation. Households that weren't legally recognized would no longer be ignored. At the Hartwell ranch, things changed without warning. Announcement: there were fewer and shorter trips to town. Deliveries were sent to the wrong place or took longer than expected. The kids were told to stay close to the house at all times. More often, gates were closed. The paths that used to go across the property were blocked. Silas Hartwell made these changes himself. Instead of sending others to do his shopping, he started doing it himself. He moved quickly and stayed away from people he knew when he got to Montpelier. He bought small amounts from a few different stores and left right away. Things that had never been in the house before and needed to be carefully noted. Clara wrote down what she was told to write down. Some things were bought for maintenance. Some of them were marked for preservation. There were no explanations with them. Nan was told to rearrange the storage. The shelves were cleaned and the containers were emptied. Things that used to be in common areas were moved to other places. Silas looked closely at the work and fixed anything he thought was wrong. Maeve got new instructions about her remedies. They told her which plants to get ready and when to use them. Quantities were given. The timing was important. Silas reminded her that mistakes could get people to notice. Faith was told to keep her animals farther away from the road. The fences were made stronger. People checked outbuildings more often. The property pulled away from the outside world even more. Inside the main house, there were more and more rules. There were limits on movement. Every day, we looked over the schedules. Changes were fixed right away. Silas kept a closer eye on meals, lessons, and work times. Pay attention. He looked at people's faces and wrote down signs of hesitation, tiredness, and silence that lasted too long. The light on the western edge of the property showed up more often at night. It stayed steady for longer periods of time and sometimes burned until morning. No one was allowed to go near the building. People were even told not to talk about it. Silas always had the key with him. People no longer talked about how Ruth was gone. People didn't talk about her name very often. People didn't remember her old responsibilities. They saw them as tasks. The family changed without talking about it. The Hartwell ranch got quieter as summer turned into fall. There was even less contact with the town. The rules that govern everyday life were no longer seen as choices or warnings. They were followed. Eleanor stopped coming to the main house in the fall of 1894. Routine was used to explain her absence at first. It was said that lessons would be put off. The kids were told to study by themselves in silence. Books stayed stacked in the corner of the lesson room, untouched but not taken away. Room, untouched but not taken away. There was no announcement. When Eleanor didn't come back for days, Silas Hartwell gave an explanation before anyone could ask. He said that she had been sent to help relatives who lived far away. He said the deal was only for a short time and was needed. He said that it wasn't something to talk about. The family accepted the explanation because they had been taught to. It didn't take long for Eleanor's space to be cleared. They put her books away and out of sight, the room that was used for. There was no ceremony when the instruction was repurposed. They gave the kids other jobs to do and told them that their lessons would start up again when it was right. No one asked when that would happen. Every time Eleanor's name came up, Silas told the same story again. He said the same thing over and over. His voice stayed calm. Detail was replaced by consistency. The kids were given careful instructions. They were told that Eleanor had left on her own and wouldn't be back for a while, so there was no need to ask where she was. Not showing respect. They were told that being obedient kept the family safe. The message was made stronger through routine instead of punishment. Meals went on as planned. Work assignments took the place of lessons during the hours. There was no more instruction. There was only silence. Habit took over curiosity. Maeve was the first to notice that the kids had changed. When asked, they repeated Silas's explanation exactly. There was no doubt in their answers. When asked more, they stopped talking and looked at the door, waiting for someone to let them in. Fear started to take the place of confusion in the house. The structure was not affected by Eleanor's absence. It made it stronger. The system took in her leaving as it had taken in Ruth's death. People were given new duties. The schedule worked out. Silas watched closely. He quickly fixed the hesitation. He told the family that trust was the key to stability, that questioning made them weak, and that safety needed acceptance. No one said anything to him. The western building was still off limits. The light there was steady and didn't move most nights now. People acted like it was normal and didn't talk about it. People said Eleanor's name less and less as the weeks went by. No one talked about her role anymore. The reason given for her absence became set in stone and unquestioned. The lesson was clear inside the Hartwell ranch. People could be taken out without any problems as long as the story about why they were taken out stayed the same. The changes inside the Hartwell ranch went on after Eleanor. By the middle of 1894, people no longer saw Odessa sewing clothes in the common rooms. At first, her absence fit in with the new routine. The clothes still looked fixed. The linen stayed clean. The work she had done went on without any breaks that could be seen. Silas Hartwell said that Odessa was sick and resting when asked. He didn't say where. He didn't say when she would come back. The explanation was given once and not again unless it was needed. Days, then weeks went by. Odessa never came back. Faith spent less time near the main house soon after that. She was harder to see because she was working with the animals. People ate their meals quickly. The conversation got less. Silas said that Faith had to be away from the house for a long time because of her job when she didn't come home one night. He said it would only last for a short time. There was no resistance to the explanation settling into place. It was hard to put into words, but easy to feel, how the mood inside the house changed. Things started to slow down. Voices got quieter. Kids stopped following the rules and started waiting for instructions. Things that used to fill the day now mostly just kept people busy. Silas started new ways of doing things without calling them rules. It was required to go to evening meetings. The prayers got longer. Before and after meals, everyone had to be quiet. The kids were told to stay in their seats until they were told to leave. The family did these things without knowing when they started or why they were important. The western building was always there. Almost every night, the light showed up there. It stayed the same until early morning, when it vanished before the family woke up. People were not allowed to get close to the building. There weren't any chores to do near it. Even looks in its direction were fixed. Maeve saw that things were being moved there. Things she hadn't planned for were missing from storage. The things Silas had bought were no longer kept in the main house. Silas told her where some things had gone when she asked. Were no longer her problem. Nayan saw that the schedules for preserving food had changed. They changed the amounts without saying why. They kept rearranging the storage areas, as if they were making room for something they couldn't see. Clara saw that the records didn't match the activity anymore. Pages were taken out of the ledgers. There were new entries that didn't have dates. Silas took the book from her hands and told her to stop worrying about things that weren't her job when she hesitated. The family learned to stop paying attention. Kids stopped asking about Faith and Odessa. Their names, like Eleanor's before them, stopped coming up in the conversation. When people talked about them, they said they were somewhere else, doing work that needed to be done, or meeting obligations outside of the ranch. The explanations stayed the same. That consistency took the place of truth. Fear didn't come out of nowhere. It settled down slowly through silence and repetition. It was clear in the way kids stayed away from certain rooms, in the way women looked down when Silas came in, and in the way that no one talked unless they were asked. The structure that had once looked neat now felt heavy. The western building stayed the same at the edge of the property. The door stayed locked. The light kept coming. The ranch changed to avoid that presence, changing how people lived their lives every day. At Hartwell Ranch, being away had become normal, and normal had made being away okay. Jonah Hartwell had figured out how to stay hidden. He knew the ranch's rhythm as well as any adult by the summer of 1894. He knew when Silas Hartwell left the main house and how long he was gone for. He knew which tasks would get people's attention and which ones would let someone move without being seen. He talked less than he listened, and waited for times when no one was paying close attention. He also learned what it meant to be quiet. Jonah had watched Eleanor leave the house. He had seen Odessa's work go on without her, and heard Faith's name less and less each week. He had learned not to ask questions and not to say what he saw again. But knowing the rules didn't make them any less important. One afternoon, Jonah was sent to the far end of the property to check the fence. The job put him closer to the road than he had been able to go for months. He finished the job carefully and didn't come back right away. He waited instead. When the road was clear and the house behind him was still, Jonah left the ranch without looking back. He didn't run. He walked steadily, staying close to the edges of the path and avoiding ground that is open. He didn't bring anything with him. People started to notice him when he got to the edge of Montpelier. He went into a small store near the post office and stood still until someone saw him. Jonah didn't answer directly when someone asked him where he was from. He wanted to know if he could leave a message. He folded the paper he made several times. The writing was short and not very good. He didn't explain everything. He didn't have to. The message asked for help and said the Hartwell Ranch. The shopkeeper read They wrote down the note once and didn't ask any questions. She told Jonah to hold on. She realized he had already stepped back toward the door and disappeared into the street when he didn't answer. Local officials got the message through normal channels. It was not seen as an emergency. There were notes like this that came up from time to time, usually because of family arguments or misunderstandings. The name was still familiar. The Hartwell Ranch had never been a problem. Without any fuss, Deputy Marshal Owen Consincade got the note. He read it carefully and put it away. He didn't do anything right away. He started to watch instead. He asked quiet questions in Montpelier. He looked over records without anyone noticing. He saw patterns that had seemed unimportant before, like the lack of complaints, visitors, and the steady withdrawal of a household that had once been easy to see. Jonah did not go back to the ranch. People quickly noticed that he was gone. Before anyone asked for one, Silas Hartwell gave an explanation. He said that the boy had gone to do other jobs. He said it was a necessary arrangement and not something to worry about. People in the house accepted the explanation. The message Jonah left outside the ranch didn't go away as quickly. Owen Consincade didn't go to the Hartwell Ranch right away. He went back to work after getting the note and waited for some time to pass. In Bear Lake County, sudden action often met with resistance. Watching quietly gave clearer results. He waited for routine to show him what urgency could not. He started in Montpelier. Consincade looked over the tax filings and property records for the Hartwell Ranch. Everything seemed to be in order. Payments were up to date. It was clear who owned it. The county didn't have any complaints. There was no sign of instability or conflict. Next, he talked to the people who owned the stores. People remembered Silas Hartwell as polite and helpful. He paid in full and didn't stick around. They noticed that his visits had become shorter and more frequent in the past few months. People bought things in smaller amounts and from different places. People bought things that didn't clearly fit with what they needed for the season. Kincaid wrote this down but didn't say anything. He went to the post office and looked over the delivery logs. Packages sent to the ranch didn't always arrive on time. Some were picked up late, and others were sent to a different place. There was no clear pattern. The number of letters just slowly went down. Not much information was given by neighbors. People who lived near the Hartwell property said it was a quiet place where people kept to themselves. They hadn't heard fights or other problems. They had not seen visitors. A few people said that there seemed to be fewer people there than before, but no one could say when that change happened. The absence of certainty was consistent. Kincaid reviewed burial records in the county. Ruth Hartwell appeared in the register with a date and location consistent with what was known. There was no medical report attached. This was not unusual. Many deaths in the area were handled without doctors. He did not pursue that line further. Instead, he compared. Names. He looked for Eleanor, Odessa, and Faith in public records. None appeared in recent filings. There were no travel notices, no marriage records, no death certificates. Their absence was not evidence, but it was notable. Kincaid spoke briefly with a school clerk who recalled that lessons once conducted at the Hartwell Ranch had stopped. The clerk had assumed the family no longer wished to participate. No explanation had been offered. Each detail on its own meant little. Together, they suggested withdrawal. Kincaid did not confront Silas Hartwell. He did not visit the ranch. He continued observing from a distance and documenting what could be confirmed. He requested additional information through official channels and waited for responses. By the end of summer 1894, he had established enough irregularity to justify further action. He began preparing the legal groundwork. Owen Kincaid arrived at the Hartwell Ranch with authority that had been prepared quietly. The visit took place in the month of September 1894. There was no announcement made in advance. The decision was carried out through routine procedure and accompanied by 2 local officers who knew the area well. Silas Hartwell met them at the gate. He did not appear surprised. He did not raise his voice or ask for explanation. He listened as Kincaid presented the order and stepped aside without resistance. The officers entered the property and moved toward the main house. The household was separated without force. Women and children were gathered and directed to remain together under supervision. Questions were discouraged. Silence settled quickly. The routine they had followed for years adjusted again without protest. Kincaid began with the buildings closest to the house. Rooms were inspected one by one. Storage areas were opened. Records were requested and reviewed. Nothing immediately out of place was found. The house was clean, orderly, controlled. Kincaid moved next to the outbuildings. Barns used for animals were checked and dismissed. Sheds for tools revealed nothing unusual. Each structure fit the purpose it appeared to serve. The western building remained. It stood apart from the others at the edge of the property. Its door was secured. There were no markings to suggest its use, no equipment nearby, no assigned work connected to it. Kincaid requested the key. Silas produced it without hesitation. When the door was open, the smell was the first thing noticed. It was sharp and unfamiliar. Not decay, not smoke. Something preserved rather than broken down. Inside, the space had been arranged deliberately. Furniture had been placed as if for use. Objects were positioned carefully. Containers lined the walls. Materials purchased over many months were present in quantities that matched no ordinary household purpose. Kincaid examined the contents methodically. Records were found, notes written in a steady hand, dates listed without commentary, entries that referred to preservation and maintenance. The names of those who were no longer present appeared more than once. The officers remained silent. Nothing inside the building suggested haste or accident. The space had been maintained, cleaned, returned to order repeatedly. Consincade closed the ledger and signaled to the others. The search did not continue further. Outside, the household waited without speaking. Silas Hartwell stood where he had been left, his posture unchanged. Consincade informed him that he would be taken into custody. Silas did not resist. Bear Lake County brought Silas Hartwell to court the next year. In the first few months of 1895, the proceedings began. People who had only heard of the Hartwell Ranch from a distance and by word of mouth filled the town of Montpelier. A lot of people came not out of curiosity, but to find out how so much could have happened without anyone noticing. The case went step by step. Owen Concade showed records he had collected over the course of months, such as property filings and purchase logs. Ledger entries found in the Western Building. Names kept coming up in dates that matched up with disappearances, already known in the community. The pattern didn't depend on confession. It depended on building up. People were called to testify. Shopkeepers said that people were buying things differently and being careful not to buy them. People in the neighborhood talked about people slowly pulling away and not showing up for no reason. The clerks confirmed that the lessons were over and that there had been no communication. Along with testimony about sealed coffins and limited access, burial records were looked at. They asked each member of the household questions separately. Their statements were short and consistent. They said things over and over that had been explained to them for years. When people asked them about actions or choices, they pointed to Silas Hartwell. They said they had never been allowed inside the Western Building when asked. Jonah Hartwell was the last person to testify. He talked about how the house was set up and the rules that everyone had to follow. He talked about names that people stopped saying and jobs that kept going even though the people who used to do them weren't there. He talked about how he left the ranch without permission and wrote the note that brought attention to the property. His story didn't add any new information. It confirmed what was already known. Many people thought Silas Hartwell would defend himself in a certain way, but he didn't. He didn't deny that he was in charge or that he had given the order. He talked about duty and safety in a calm way. He said that what he did was necessary to keep the household safe from outside interference. The court did not agree with that. The judgment was given by the end of 1896. Silas Hartwell was found to be at fault for multiple illegal acts related to the disappearance and hiding of people who lived with him. The sentence took into account how bad the findings were and how long they had been going on. The Hartwell Ranch was taken apart not long after. People left the buildings. Records were stored away. The western structure was shut down and then taken down. The land changed owners and was put to normal use. There was nothing on it that gave away what had been there before. People who lived under Silas Hartwell didn't stay together. Some went back to their extended family. Some people left Bear Lake County for good. Their names showed up from time to time in records that had nothing to do with the ranch that had been their home for so long. Daily life in Montpelier went back to normal. The roads were full again. The doors of the church opened and closed like they always had. People started talking about the same things again. Every year, fewer and fewer people talked about the Hartwell Ranch. What was left was not just one moment or action, but a record of how order kept silence, how routine explained absence, and how authority was allowed to stay in place without being questioned because it seemed stable. Life in Bear Lake Valley went on, and people knew that what lasts quietly isn't always safe, and that distance can hide more than disorder ever could.